Hi guys, welcome to my channel. So this is a bit of a break from the norm. It's something I wanted to try to start doing for quite a while, and it's kind of a little bit of the reason why I actually stopped doing my vlogs. If anyone used to watch my vlogs, still really sorry about that. But yeah, this is kind of like one of those things I've wanted to try for a very long time. I thought I'd try and give like a bit of a introduction video as to this sort of new part of the channel I want to try and do. So basically, obviously, other than my love of gaming and Tomb Raider and everything Italian, you could probably tell from the decoration around me, but I am also a huge, massive fan of ghost stories and paranormal things. Not so much with things like cryptids or aliens or anything like that. My thing is things that go bump in the night, and just I love the stories, I love the history. I think that's probably what it's connected to, is my love of history, because as again, if you know me, you know I have a huge love of history. I'm a big history buff. So yeah, I think it kind of ties in with that. But basically, yeah, I wanted to try and make a new sort of branch, not only on my YouTube channel but also on my Twitch, where hopefully I'm going to be able to start playing scary games, even though I hate scary games. I need to get out of my comfort zone and actually try something a bit different. So that's the plan eventually, is to make maybe like Fridays a chilling stream Friday, something along those lines. But in terms of what I want to do with my YouTube channel, I want to try and create, like, just tell ghost stories or talk about like the origins of ghost stories, the psychology behind ghost stories, because I just find it so fascinating. If anything, I probably should have been a parapsychologist because I just loved the subject. But yeah, going back to like the very beginning, I could, like, from as long as I can remember, I have been obsessed with ghost stories. Like, I absolutely love them. As a kid, if I could get out books on ghost stories, I could. I have a whole section on my bookshelf here that is just dedicated to ghost stories, and just anywhere we go that has any sort of historical or just any has any history to it, I will most likely see if they have like any local ghost story books, because and I will buy them. It's guaranteed I will buy a ghost story book. So I'm kind of just in that sort of like stage of actually wondering how I'm actually going to do this, in terms of, would people want to hear like local ghost stories or send in their ghost stories? I don't know how I want to go forward with it. So if you guys have any idea on like how you would like me to do it, if you obviously like ghost stories, obviously you won't be watching this if you don't, but yeah, if you do, if you are interested in hearing other people's like real life ghost stories, or you just want me to tell sort of like local tales in terms of from different areas, so obviously I'd probably go with the ones that I know the most at first. So I would look at like London, obviously south of England, which is where I'm from, different things like that. But I'd love to look at also other stories from different countries, like across the pond in America, go into Asia, like around Europe, and like different things like that. So I'd love to give that sort of thing a go. But yeah, just let me know in the comments below what you would actually like to see in terms of where you'd like to see me branch out with the ghost story side of things. But yeah, just for this video alone, what I actually want to talk about is my own experience and my own love of ghost stories. Apologies in advance because I've suddenly caught a cold, so if I sound really bugged up, blame Bubs. It's all the stress as well, I think, from the fact that we're going away this weekend and I need to still pack. So yeah, try not to stress too much, but obviously, yeah, it's going to be a bit. So apologies in advance if I sound really bugged up. I'm trying to keep it under control, but I can't guarantee it. Anyway, so as I said earlier, my childhood was just full of me scaring myself with ghost stories because I just absolutely loved them. And I still do, and I just love going on ghost walks, on ghost hunts, and like different things like that. Before me and my husband had Bubs, 4 years ago, nearly 4 years ago now, we actually used to do quite regularly ghost hunts. So we'd spend the night in haunted places. Like we'd spend an absolute fortune going to all these places and just seeing if we would ever get a glimpse of a ghost ourselves. Both me and my husband never really had any experience of ghosts ourselves. Like I said, me growing up, I was obsessed and I was aching for the day that I would actually have an experience myself, but it never happened. My husband was the same in terms of he never really had any experiences. He has one experience that he told me about, which I think kind of sparked his interest in ghosts, and hence why we then started doing all this ghosty stuff when we became adults. And he told me about, basically he went to a boarding school in the UK, in like basically the Midlands, and it was a very, very old school, and it was run by a bunch of Catholic priests, and he boarded there as well. So like he did live within the village, but his father decided that he needed to board there. So there was this thing that basically, you can imagine with kids, there's this whole thing of you're boarding, the teachers, or in this case priests, say lights out, lights go out. As soon as you know it's safe, you still start prattling about and just playing up as you do as kids, while you have a lookout. And what used to happen apparently was they would be prattling about, just playing around as you do as kids, and they'd hear someone shout KV, and no one knew what this meant. They just heard KV, and they just would instantly know through experience that KV basically was warning someone's coming. And it wasn't even like a shout, it was just like a KV, KV. That was all they'd hear. And they'd know to quickly jump into the beds, pretend to be asleep, lights out, before the priest who was on that night would come and make sure that everyone was asleep. So, like I said, no one really knew what it meant. No one knew who was doing this. It was kind of just assumed someone else was doing it. It was only a couple of years later, after they'd left the school and they'd become adults, that there was a reunion, and someone actually brought up the whole subject of, do we actually know who would shout or would whisper KV when we were prattling about, sort of thing? And do we know who it was who was actually warning us? And what the hell does KV mean anyway? No one knew what it meant. They just had no idea, and they were just like, well, I just assumed it was one of you guys. I'm like, no, when it weren't me, it definitely wasn't me. I was too busy sort of punching Steve in the face or whatever. So yeah, they never knew who it was, and it was only after like some time away that someone decided, you know what, I'm going to look it up. He found out that KV was a phrase that private school students would use, and I think it means either it's danger or warning in Latin, and yeah, it's something that the private school students would use to warn other students that a teacher or a priest was coming or whatever, which they found absolutely fascinating, considering they never studied Latin at their school. It had been something that had been sort of gone extinct from their curriculum from like years and years before. So they always found that very interesting, the fact that there was someone whispering KV, but they still don't know who it is. So that's the only real story that my husband had growing up that could be seen as a spooky thing. For me, I never had anything. Like I said, I just was obsessed with reading ghost stories and scaring myself. It was only, like I said, when I moved in with my, at that point he was my partner, just like my boyfriend, and we decided to move in together. And we moved, he originally lived in Wimbledon, I lived with my parents in Essex, and we decided to move to a town called Epsom, which is famous for its Epsom races, and it's quite an old town, and beautiful, beautiful town, and I'd love to still live there if we hadn't been priced out, because we wanted to buy, and yeah, there's no way we could buy in Epsom, we'd have to rent. But anyway, my whole life I have lived in 70s builds, like characterless boxes, just not anything. I mean, obviously they were homes, and I felt sort of cozy, I was with family, I felt loved and everything, but my whole life all I had ever wanted, again being obsessed with history, I wanted to live in an old building, anything that was more than 100 years old, anything, well at the time, anything that was more than 20 years old. So yes, it was always something I wanted to do. And then the opportunity came up when me and my husband were looking for somewhere to live, and we found this 17th century manor house in Epsom that had been basically, the bottom 2 floors were still where the landlord lived, but the top 2 floors were apartments. There was 2 apartments on each floor, and it was absolutely beautiful. And again, people know me for being a Tomb Raider fan, and it did have very much a feel of Croft Manor, and a lot of Tomb Raider fans who have seen it have said about the fact it looked like Croft Manor. And it was a bit of a weird setup in terms of the front garden, because it was a gated residence. The front garden was completely off limits, it was very private. We got to use it twice. That was the day of moving in and then our day of moving out, because we got on really well with the landlord, so they kind of we had a bit of favouritism going on, and they really liked us, so they let us use their front garden, so we had, it was a bit easier for us to move our stuff. But there was no lift because obviously it was a grade 2 listed building, so they couldn't put anything like that in, so you had to walk up 2 floors to get to our apartment. And I remember walking around and just being so excited when we were able to buy it, because it still had the traditional sash windows, the high ceilings. It was absolutely amazing. I loved it. So I was so excited when we were able to move in. However, there was the whole experience of my first day of actually moving in, and I have never felt so unwelcome in a building. Not by like the landlord or our neighbours or anything. It was purely like I said, we had to travel up the two floors to actually get to the apartment. So my husband said what he would do is he would bring things up the stairs, like the heavy boxes, and I could then take them into the apartment. The problem was, when he disappeared downstairs and out into the front garden to get our stuff, I was too terrified to actually walk into the apartment. I was just rooted to the floor. I could not move because I was terrified of going in that apartment by myself. I felt so threatened. I just could not do it. I just looked at that door and I was just like, the fear. It was the fear, the primal fear I remember as a child when my parents told me I had to go to bed and the landing light was off and I had to walk upstairs in the dark. It was that just guttural fear that anything could happen to me as soon as I walked up those stairs and into that darkness. And it was in the middle of the day. It wasn't as if like I was standing there and all the lights were off or whatever. It was in the middle of the day. It was on a busy street. You could hear the traffic going past everything. So it wasn't as if I wasn't in a situation where I should have felt threatened, but I did feel absolutely terrified. So I had to wait for my husband to be there for me to take things in, and then I'd wait outside for him again to be able to take things back in. At the time, I didn't feel anything, think anything of it. I think it was more maybe like a primal sort of, because it's old, therefore it might be haunted sort of thing. I don't know if it was just like that sort of that thing in my mind telling me that. I don't know, but yeah, it was just one of those. Looking back on it and putting everything together, it kind of makes sense to me. But at the time, yeah, I don't think I really thought much of it other than it just being, it's somewhere new, it's somewhere strange, it's somewhere old. So naturally, when I see old things, I think ghosts. That's all I can think of. So our experiences of living in this apartment is, I'm trying to summarize them. One being when it was one evening, my husband was at home, so he was just watching TV while I was out having drinks with colleagues, and I was just watching TV. Everything was perfectly normal, and I'd said about the fact that I was on my way home. I never actually gave him an update in terms of where I was. I was with colleagues. I was just basically chatting with them rather than giving him regular updates like what we normally give each other. And he said he was watching TV, and where the apartments are quite close, you hear, if a neighbour comes in, you'd hear the door open sort of thing. But you can tell that it's a neighbour's door that's open and shut. But then you can't really hear much else unless they have the TV too loud or they put music on or whatever. So my husband heard the door close, open and close. So he thought it was our front door. He said it sounded clear enough for it to have been our front door. Which you think, fair enough, could have been mistaken for next door. But then, when you hear someone, so you get used to your, where you live. If you live there long enough, you get used to hearing someone walking up the stairs or someone coming down the hallway towards you or whatever. You get used to those sounds that you hear. Basically, then my husband, obviously, as he heard the front door close, he heard someone walking down the corridor. And basically, the apartment was just a long corridor. And on the end, so basically, you're walking towards the living room. The living room's right at the end of the corridor. And on your right, as you're walking down, you have the bedroom is the first door, then the bathroom, and then the kitchen, and then in front of you is the living room. So he had someone walking down that corridor, and he just assumed it was me. So he turned round, because the sofa, where the sofa was laid out in the living room, the sofa had its back to the corridor. So he turned round to be like, oh, how was it? And no one was there. So that kind of put him on edge for the rest of the night, and he told me when I got home that he'd felt like it kind of freaked him out a bit. And then it was then that he looked and he got, I then text to say I was on the bus or something, so I was 10 minutes away or whatever. So he was kind of, like I said, a bit freaked out by that. Another time as well was we were laying in bed, like we were asleep. It was like early morning. I remember it was in the summer because it was about 5 o'clock in the morning and the light was coming in through the windows, so it was definitely summer. And we're laying there just like stirring, like I think getting up, like getting ready to go to work that morning, when the stereo in the living room came on by itself. And again, like I said, our bedroom is at the opposite end. It's like basically by the front door, and the living room is over the other side of the house pretty much. The stereo just came on by itself, and it was incredibly loud as well, and both of us sort of like sat upright, like scared. You can imagine, just scared the crap out of us, like what the hell. Originally I thought it was next door and their music being really loud. It was only because my husband got up, stormed into the living room, and he said that it was basically our stereo had started by itself. Not had it before, not had it since, so it was kind of just really, really random. And the stereo remote was on the sofa. I can't remember if we'd left it there or whatever, but basically it had just been left on the sofa in the middle of the seat sort of thing. So again, that was just a really random thing to happen. Like I said, that's the only time the stereo's ever made that happen. And the other thing as well, it was just, I think that was kind of like things that my husband have experienced. For me personally, like I said, going back to like the first day when we moved in, and how sort of threatened I felt, I think that kind of feeling stayed with me for the 6 years that we actually lived there. And to me, it kind of like, I just had in my mind's eye that if it was something paranormal, then it was probably either, I would definitely say it was a male presence, and it was either the owner of the house, the previous owner of the house, as well, or maybe even like a butler or someone like that, who just did not want me there for some reason. I don't know if it was because I was a woman and I was living in a part of the house that I shouldn't be. I don't know, because obviously we were on the lower, so like to Americans it would be the 3rd floor, but to the Brits it's 2nd floor. So the servants' quarters would have actually been the floor above. This level would probably have been, I guess, like the bedrooms maybe for like the owners of the house. I don't know, but because the layout has obviously completely changed. But yeah, so that's what it felt like to me. It was just like basically there was this male presence that did not want me there. And there were so many occasions, like I can still remember sitting there. I just got out the shower and I'd gone into the bedroom to get dressed, and I just had the towel around me. I sat on the edge of the bed and I was just looking at my phone, and I can remember feeling like someone just poked me in the back. Like I could literally feel like my shoulder sort of move forward, as if someone just really sort of pushed me like that. And it did freak me out because again, it's one of those things where I'm like, I could just shrug it off as just being something because I didn't feel, because I was on edge in that house. I don't know if it was just because of that, or it could have just been something. But after experiencing that, I was very reluctant to get dressed because I felt like there was then someone watching me. So it was quite not a pleasant experience. There was also, in that house, I suffered with really bad sleep paralysis, where I felt like there was someone in the corner of the room watching me, and that he was basically out to get me. All I could do was turn my head to look at my partner. I couldn't even sort of scream. I couldn't whisper his name. I couldn't do anything to try and get his attention while he was fast asleep. And it was the most terrified I'd ever been. And I know, like, I've looked into sleep paralysis. I've seen a few documentaries on the subject, because it affected me so badly when I was in this apartment. And a lot of the explanations is because of your body's in between awake and sleep. So your body's switched off, but your brain is awake. So it just comes up with, like, it goes into a bit of like a panic confusion mode. So because it doesn't know what's happening. But it's the fact that they put it down to being a sign of stress in your life, or they think it's because of like stress going on in your life. And it's weird because since living in this house, like we own this house and it was like 1960s build, I've never experienced anything spooky in this house, and I've never had sleep paralysis. I think I've only had sleep paralysis once when I was in this house, and that was when we'd first moved in and my husband had to go away on business. So I was asleep by myself in the room, and we had incredibly noisy neighbours at the time, so my anxiety was up because of that. So I can remember, like, but I think it was more like a nightmare because I can remember shouting in my sort of dream. So it wasn't real like sleep paralysis, and it wasn't like I saw anyone in the room. It was more like because they were banging, like it was 2 o'clock in the morning and they were banging next door, And I think in my head I felt like it was someone trying to get in through the window. So I think it was more linked to that. But yeah, I've had more stressful situations in this house that I could have explained away sleep paralysis for. But in the flat in Epsom, there wasn't anything, I guess, other than the wedding, but I don't think, as far as I'm aware, we hadn't been planning the wedding at that point. I was in a secure job, I was in a really good relationship, still am, but yeah, there was no issues with my job, there was no issues with our relationship. We didn't have any financial worries, we were in like a really good spot with everything. My anxiety was just just teetering. It was just normal rather than just being up and down like it is now with Bubs. But yeah, so there's nothing that I can really put down to me being stressed that would actually cause the sleep paralysis. Yeah, so it's one of those things, like I said, looking back at it now, it like I've started adding things up, and I do put it down to the house, and that I feel like it was, yeah, just someone or something just didn't want us there. So that's basically like all the ghost stories I have in terms of like how I felt about that house. But again, people will probably watch this. I'm one of those people where, like I said, I love ghost stories and I love being scared, but I'm not one of those people that jump to conclusions and just instantly think, well, that must be a ghost. I'm more than happy for people to watch this who do not believe in ghosts, and for people to say that it's very easily explainable. I can see it being easily explainable, and I do, like I said, I can kind of see these as things that you could put off as being explainable. Like I said, the fact that I felt threatened because it was a new house, and it may have just been that my back was then instantly up because of that reason. The fact that, like I said, because it's an old house, I just took everything that happened to be paranormal just because old means ghosts in my eyes. So there's all that sort of stuff. So yeah, a lot of it could probably be explained as just like a psychological thing with me. Again, it's just something I'm really interested in. I find it very interesting. And at the time, yeah, I was very spooked by these things. And like I said, putting them all together, it does feel like it was because we were living in that house. Because like I said, since being here, I've not had anything like that. I've not felt threatened when I've been on my own. I've not felt like as if anyone's watching me or anything. So yeah, it's just it was a very unique experience to that particular place. The other stories I have are from the ghost experiences, the haunted experiences that me and my husband did over the years while we were living in this flat in Epsom. So basically, because it was something that I wasn't able to do as a child, I actively went out to see if I could have a ghost experience. And I have to say, for someone who went into these things thinking that this was going to be my opportunity to actually find out once and for all if ghosts were real, yeah, I hate to say it, but I think that I have actually come away more cynical of ghosts being an actual thing than actually believing in them, which upsets me greatly. But unfortunately, I think it's the sort of people that go to these ghost events that kind of put me off, because whenever we've been to these things, there is always people that are either so desperate to experience something, or they just want to be the center of attention. I don't know, but when things happen, it's because of this particular individual, and you can just tell they're playing up, and it just makes me super cynical. I go to try and remember all the places that we've been to. There is a lot of places that we've been to, all in the UK, I should point out. So I would try and list them off, and what I will do is, like I said, most of my experiences from these events have been mostly nothing happened, came away disappointed, although it is the opportunity to spend a night in like a really old house or whatever, so that is what fills me with glee. I come away thinking at least I got to spend time in these places when you don't really get that opportunity like any other time. So it's got to a point, and that's how I see these things now. God knows when I'll be going on another one again, because like I said, with Bubs, I don't really see it happening. But yeah, we've been to quite a few. I remember, I'll start with the first one we went to. The first one we went to was, see, this is a rubbish I can't even remember the name of the first one. It was Falstaff Museum, I think it was, in Stratford-upon-Avon, so Shakespeare country. And Your first one is always the most memorable, I think, in terms of because you don't know what to expect. And I was terrified most of the night, I think. And it was a beautiful place. It was like this 17th century, it was about 15th, 16th century old pub that had been converted into a museum, which was about Shakespeare. Obviously, everything around Stratford-upon-Avon is based on Shakespeare. It was just this like cheap little museum that you could go in that had all these different displays based around the era and different things. I know, I'm pretty sure Most Haunted have done an episode there. But yeah, so basically what would happen on these nights is you meet up with a group of, I guess, it can be, I think, up to like 15 people, I think. And then you'll have at least 2 people there from the actual company that are running the ghost experience, as well as a psychic who they will hire for the event. And you get like biscuits, tea, coffee all thrown in and snacks and stuff. And basically like you arrive there at like 10 o'clock at night, I guess, like 9 o'clock, or always when it's dark. And you will be shown around the property that you're currently investigating. It will be in pitch black. You'll have torches, but you won't be able to see anything. And that's when I started like first of all getting absolutely terrified. But yeah, they'll show you around. They'll talk about the history of the place, and they'll talk about the different ghosts or the different sightings that they've had. They'll ask the psychic to do like a sort of reading, like see if they can sense anyone there or anything. And then basically after that, they split you up into groups to look at different areas within the property. The problem is when you have these sorts of events, and like I said, when you can have up to like 15, 20, I think I've even been one where there's like even 30 people, and they're only in small places, and they're small places, very old places, and you can hear everything that's going on. So nothing can be really done properly. I feel like if you're going to do this like properly, you need as small amount of people as possible, but you would never get that. But anyway, with Falstaff, I think there's got to have been at least 15 of us, I think. So it was quite a big group. And so we're walking around. And the entire night was completely uneventful. There's nothing that really happened. So I think it was a good way to start off in terms of, but I did come away quite disappointed that nothing really happened. There's only one thing that happened. And it was basically, like I said, they were walking us around at the beginning. And he's my husband now, but he was just my boyfriend at the time. And he knew I was absolutely terrified, so I was just standing there like sort of all huddled, sort of like holding myself, being absolutely terrified. And my partner decided to put his arm around me without warning me, so he was standing here and then he put his arm around me on the other side, and it absolutely scared the shit because I didn't realise he was going to do it. So I just sort of like just turned around and just went wallop and just like hit him, because I was just like, you just scared the shit. Do not do that. This is just like, that's the worst thing you could do. So he was like, oh, okay, I'm sorry, I'll never do that again. So yeah, so he kind of like avoided me for the night. Well, not avoided me, but just kind of kept his distance to not sort of absolutely terrify me again and end up getting like a smack round the head. And then we walked into like one of the final rooms, and I think it was the room where Most Haunted had done a thing with Derek Akora. Derek Akora had been there, and he'd had like an experience there or something. So we're all stood in this room, and they're talking about like all the different things that had happened, and like they tell you all like to spread out and stuff. And basically I was standing there, and all of a sudden I felt like someone sort of like pinched my bum, and I was kind of like, what the hell was that? And I did turn around to just sort of have a go at my boyfriend and be like, seriously, I told you not to do that sort of stuff. And I looked, and there was no one. Well, he wasn't there. He was over on this side, so like well without like away from me to not make sure I didn't like feel anything. So the closest person to me was way sort of out of arm's reach. There was a guy standing there with his partner, and they were way like out of reach, definitely out of arm's reach. So I was kind of like, okay, that was really weird. When I spoke to the guy that was running the event, I said to him, like, because he went around and asked people, oh, did you experience anything? And I said, well, I had something like really random happen where I felt someone like pinch my bum. And he was like, oh, okay, that's interesting to hear. And I was like, oh, really? And he said, yeah, there's reports of like there was a male sort of presence, and I think the psychic picked up on it in that room, that didn't like women, or just leery over any sort of woman that came into the room, any female presence. But he didn't say anything more. He said, he was like, I will come back to you, remind me. He said, I'll come back to you and speak to you about it later because there's an interesting point to point out to you. So I was like, oh, okay, intrigued. Never did though. Completely sort of like we both forgot about it. It was only like when I was back at work, like the next week, I was like, you know what, I'm going to look it up I'll see if I can contact the guy and see if I can look it up. So basically what I did was I went on their website, the company website, and they have a little forum or like a little chat room where people could sort of share their experiences of what they've been through on these events. And I went on there and I looked up Falstaff. And I started scrolling through and like reading people's experiences and stuff, and a lot of them, like I said, is sometimes you read them and you're just like, seriously, it's a bit far-fetched. But there was this one woman who went the year before me, so obviously wasn't in my group, she'd been before me, and she talked about being in that exact room and again having her bum pinched, and I was kind of like, well, okay. So yeah, that was from our first experience. So that kind of, like I said, I left disappointed, but then I became intrigued by that sort of lone experience that I'd had. After that, we went to, like, there's too many for me to really mention. I could talk about, we did Alton Towers, we did 33 East Road, or whatever it's called. It's meant to be one of the most haunted houses in England. Felt nothing there at all. So there's an inn on the moors, Jamaica Inn. I think it's in Dartmoor, I think. That was a really interesting one in terms of it was just like a lot of history, but never experienced anything. Again, it was the whole thing of like just watching people, like how people acted. Like there was a woman that pretended to sort of feel faint and like knocked into us and stuff, and my friend was not having it. She was not impressed. Nothing happened that night, like I said, apart from some people overacting. But there was one thing with we'd booked to actually stay at the Jamaica Inn that night. So basically you go to this place at 9 o'clock at night, you finish at like 3 o'clock in the morning, and you can actually, a lot of these places you can either, if they are like hotels or whatever, you can stay on and you can book a room to actually stay the night. So because we were doing the hunt there, we were like, well, we'll stay the night in the haunted inn. So we stayed there, and we picked 2 rooms. And we were advised by the staff that one of those rooms was the actual haunted room that is always talked about in, like, whenever people mention the ghost stories in Jamaica Inn. So I was really excited. I was like, oh, me and my husband can stay there. The 2 friends we went with, when it came to picking rooms, because we were like, we've got, I think it was room 16 and 17. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure those are the numbers. So 16 and 17. And we gave them the choice. We were like, which room did you want to stay in? We hadn't told them either were haunted. We just said, which room did you want? They said, I think it was room 16. And they picked room 16 because it had this huge poster bed sort of thing. And I was super disappointed because obviously I wanted to stay in there because that was the haunted room. But I didn't say anything to them because I didn't want them to then go into that room, be scared, and sort of like, because I'd said to them it was haunted, I didn't want them to have, if they were to have any experiences, they could put it down to the fact that they were expecting to have experiences. So I just said, oh, okay. So I was really gutted that I didn't get to stay in there, but I was like, oh, well, probably nothing will happen anyway. And when I spoke to my friends the next morning, they were both very tired and very grumpy, and they'd actually said that there had been banging going on, I can't remember if I think they said it was like, it sounded like someone banging on like trying to get the window open, and just like banging, like tapping on the bed and stuff, like shaking the bed. And one of them was saying, did you hear that, and the other one was like, just go to sleep. She was like trying to ignore it. So they both apparently had a really bad night because they had some banging and rocking going on in their room that wasn't them. So yeah, so that's the one thing I have from that experience. I have to say the most disappointing one for me, and it actually made me quite angry, was the Ancient Ram Inn, which is meant to be, again, one of the most haunted places in the country. And it's so old, it's a beautiful building. It was absolutely gorgeous. And this eccentric old man had lived there basically until he died, and then it passed to his daughters, who I don't think really look after it very well. So this old building is falling apart and probably will just completely disintegrate because they're not spending any money on looking after it. And basically they just hire it out for these sort of ghost events. So all the traffic they're getting is probably not doing the house any favours either. And I was super excited, super hyped up to actually experience something. on this event, but yeah, nothing happened. And again, because the walls are so thin, you can hear the group in the next room like calling out on different things, and it just nothing happened. I said, other than a few people, like, just, well, the one thing that made me very angry as well was that there was a guy there with his parents, and they used a Ouija board. And a Ouija board, I'm, again, quite cynical about after doing all these ghost hunts and stuff. He used this Ouija board to basically tell his mum that her dad that had just died wanted him to have his car. And he was, like, going into all this sort of, like, details about the car that was like, oh, only me and Granddad would know that stuff. So it's like, oh, it's funny then that you're able to say this stuff because you would have this knowledge. Like I was saying, like, just like little things that, like, obviously geeky car things that I wouldn't be able to, like the size of the engine and the, like, things that were wrong with the car and blah blah blah, and like what needed to be fixed. And he was like, oh, so Granddad, you want me to have this car because only I can fix it up, sort of thing. And it was kept going to yes, and his mum was sitting there like, oh Dad, I know, I'm listening to you now. And it's just like, I'm like, me and my friend just got so angry listening to it. We were like, oh my god, I can't believe you're actually doing this. So yeah, that was a frustrating experience. So I think in the end we just all walked away because we were meant to be in their group to actually do the Ouija board, and we were just like, fuck it, we can't be bothered. But yeah, that was unfortunately my last experience of the ghost events. But I've saved like two of the most interesting ones, I think, for last. And the first one I'll talk about is Alton Towers. It's an amazing theme park. I've been going there since I was a kid, and I love going there at Halloween because they always make a big thing about Halloween. And basically the story behind Alton Towers is it was, like, I think it was a Duke's countryside retreat, and it was this beautiful, or it is a very, very beautiful Gothic manor. But it's absolutely, like, to look at it, you know, you just look at it and you're just like, that place is haunted as, like, AF. It's just looking at it. And I'd always wanted to go inside, but it was almost derelict because it was abandoned by the family in like the 18th century, and it was like just ripped apart. Like the insides were just ripped apart during the war effort because of the wood and the iron. It was all used to go towards the war. So it's just a shell really of a building. All you have is the outside and kind of like the like a basic floor plan of like the downstairs. Like you can't really go upstairs because all the wood from the floorboards is either rotten or was taken away. So like I said, there's just nothing left of the building apart from the outside. But the whole thing with Alton Towers is you just have this sheer amount of land that they've then built a theme park on. So as soon as I found out that you could actually do a ghost like hunt event thing within the actual house, I just jumped at the chance. I was like, I've definitely got to do this. I've wanted to do this like my whole life, so I'm definitely going to do this. It did disappoint. It was a beautiful building, but it, like I said, it just broke my heart just seeing inside and seeing that everything had just been ripped out. And basically, I remember like the main thing that happened was us going downstairs. So you go into the basement, which is where the kitchen was for the house. And again, it's just, everything's been ripped out. It's just a room with like bare brick walls and a concrete floor. And again, this was quite a big group because it's a big building. They had a bigger group in this one. And because my husband's he's a very, very brave soul. So so someone had to volunteer to go and stand outside in the corridor while we all stood in this room. And we all had to stand there, hold hands, and just like call out and different things. And basically my husband was standing out in the corridor. I mean, I think it was basically you have the corridor and then you had a room next door. So he was kind of in the doorway of this next room, sort of looking like in between the room and the corridor, sort of thing, like standing in the doorway. And I think like the guy that was running it called out, and then all of a sudden we heard like a really big sort of, almost like a clump of concrete or a rock or something just drop from a big height, or as if it was launched across a room. And everyone was kind of like, oh my god, what was that? And everyone was like, well, we're all here, there's no one else that's outside the room apart from my husband. And the guy that was running it like said, oh, did you hear anything in the next, like, did you hear that, like saying to my husband. My husband was like, yeah. And I said, well, did you hear where it came from? And he said, it sounds like it came from in this room. And they were like, is anyone else in there with you? And he's like, I hope not, I can't see anything. But like, and again, it wasn't pitch black. Like you could see around you sort of thing. It was dark outside, but you had like the moonlight coming in and different things, and a few outdoor lights because there were windows so you could see some light coming in. It weren't completely pitch black so you could see. So yeah, so that was like the one thing that happened there that was kind of interesting. And my husband is convinced, he was like, there was no one around that could have thrown that, and he said, and it was really loud, it was like right by me. And I think the final one for me to talk about was when we went to Warwick Castle. Warwick Castle is an amazing place to visit. If you can visit it, I highly recommend it. It's part of Madame Tussauds, I think, now, so it's quite touristy, but it's really good for the kids. They put a lot of stuff on for the kids, which is nice. I've not been there for years. I think the last time, like I said, this was the last time I went there, and that was a good few years ago now, about at least 7 years ago now. Or it's got to be longer than that because I've only been married 7 years. It's got to be about 8 years, I think. Anyway, so we went there with a group of friends, and one of these friends she claimed to be sensitive. In terms of like she could just feel like presences. She couldn't like physically, or like she couldn't really physically see people. I don't think it's not like I see dead people sort of thing. It's just she could sense like presences and things, and like people have auras and different things like that. But she doesn't like to talk about it too much because she knows people think it's a bit weird. So we went there together because she's never done a ghost hunt because she's too scared. She was too scared to do it. But she really wanted to do one with us because like where we were all into that sort of spooky stuff, and she was kind of like, you got me into the whole thing of wanting to do it. So I was like, okay, cool, let's do it together. So we went there, and I think she was a bit scared at first, but she opened up after a while. But again, there was this whole thing of like they take you around the building, they tell you the history and all the different ghost stories, and psychics will call out and different things like that. And what's a typical thing is they get everyone to stand all together and hold hands, and they say like your collective energy will help like the ghost be able to communicate and different things like that. And we were in, basically it was a tower, one of the towers in Warwick Castle, and it was one of the ones where there wasn't a lot in there in terms of, there was no displays, it was just a tower. I think there was like a cart in there that was full of straw. That was about it. There was nothing else in there, but there was no windows. Literally the only light came from the door, and it was a big heavy oak door, and when that was shut, no light could get in. It was absolutely pitch black. I've never seen like, I think until you've been in a room where it's just like so dark, the fact that you can't tell the difference between like opening and shutting your eyes, it's just an experience all in itself. So my friend was really gripping my hand because she was absolutely terrified, bless her. So she was like really, really gripping my hand tight. I had my husband next to me in the other hand, and we're just like really sort of holding on to each other. And at one point, I think this is probably the most, I have to say, this is probably the most convincing thing for me, I think, in terms of my experiences, because I was stood there, like I said, I couldn't see a thing. I couldn't like see a hand in front of my face. I couldn't tell when I had my eyes open and when I had them closed. It was incredibly strange. But I was standing there, and I felt this like pressure on my chest, and it, for a good 30 seconds it must have been, I felt like I couldn't breathe properly. I was like having to, like my breath was really laboured, and like it was almost as if I was about to have a panic attack, but I'd been fine before that. So it was just kind of this whole thing, and I was trying not to think too much of it. I was kind of like, oh, maybe it's just me just being scared of being here, and it was like, so I was just like, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out, and I was just like having to do this like to try and really catch my breath, because it really did feel like there was this pressure on me. But again, I was just like, oh, it's probably like psychosomatic or whatever they call it, where it's just the fear setting in sort of thing. And eventually that pressure went, and I was fine. I was like, breathed a sigh of relief. I was like, oh, thank God for that. But as soon as I breathed that sigh of relief, my friend just gripped my, like literally just grabbed my hand, like as if she'd just been made to jump. She was like that. And I was like, oh my God, are you okay? Sort of thing. Like I just whispered to her, like, are you okay? And she was like, yeah, I'm fine. And that was it. She didn't say anything else to me. But it was just weird how it happened, like as soon as I'd had that wave of like relief and was able to breathe fine again, and she just had something like happen to her. It was only when we left and we were all sort of discussing our experiences, like after we got out the tower, like she wanted to just get out of that tower, and like we got out and we were standing in like the courtyard of the castle, and that's when she actually told us, and she said basically, she said she'd felt like, because the entire time we were in there, because she was absolutely terrified, she said she just stood there with her eyes closed looking down. She just didn't want to do it. She was just like standing there, just holding on to like my hand and I think her other friend's hand, and she was just like this the entire time. She said, but she just felt like randomly. She said, I was absolutely terrified, but I was like, if I just keep my head down, I'll be fine. But then she said, I just had this feeling that someone was just standing right in front of me. And she said, and curiosity got the better of me. And she said, and I just lifted my head and looked, like I opened my eyes. And she said, and there was like this purplish, I can still vividly remember, I can see it in my mind's eye as she was telling me, and I still have this picture in my head. And she said it was this like purplish aura that was basically like it had turned into like a figure of a man, but he was like over sort of leaning over her, but he had this like monk sort of hood, so it was covering like half his face, so all she could see was like him like sneering, like a sneering sort of look on his mouth. And like it was just like a split second, because as soon as she saw that, that's when she obviously gripped me really tight, because it scared the crap out of her that she'd seen it. After that, nothing else happened. It was literally just, that was the only thing that happened that night. But for me, it's the most telling, I think, out of all the experiences we've had. And like I said, we have been on many ghost events. Like I said, I'm trying to think of all the ones that we've done, but those are the ones that stick out for me. I'm still hoping for more experiences to actually make that definitive sort of explanation for me, and that tells me whether or not they exist. But maybe that's the whole thing with ghosts, is that we're not supposed to know. I don't know. It's nice to have that belief and not have that sort of thing of, yes, they're definitely real, or no, they're definitely not real. I go through stages whether or not I believe they're real. I'm going to move on to something a bit more cute, just to end. Basically, since we've had Bubs, I've always wondered if we would have him have an imaginary friend and it end up being a ghost or something. Again, when you're obsessed with ghosts, these are the sort of things you think about. But basically, when Bubs was a baby, I guess he wasn't even 6 months. I think he must have been about 5 months old. My nan passed away. She was my mum's mum. We were quite close to her. Like, my mum had been sort of with my aunt looking after her. Like, she was in a home for dementia. And she was having, dementia care. But by the end, she just gave up and she stopped eating. She stopped drinking. So me, my husband, and my mum took Bubs to go and see her, because we were like, potentially this is goodbye. We were there in the room when she died, including Bubs. I think my husband was holding Bubs at the time. But it's always been one of those things, like, we would talk about, like, if there is such a thing as, like, the afterlife, or if Nan was to stick around after, it would most likely be that she would be watching over Bubs, because obviously he was in the room when she died, and she absolutely adored children. Like, she absolutely loved children. So we've had, like, a few occasions with him. So my husband puts him down and he'll read him, like, some stories or whatever, and then they'll just have a conversation about what's happened during the day and stuff. And Bubs started going on about, there's, like, monsters in my room, sort of thing. And my husband's like, oh, no, there's no monsters. You don't have to worry about that. And he was like, no, it's okay, because Nanny will take care of them. She'll protect me. And my husband was like, Nanny? What do you mean, like Nanny and Grandad Nanny? And I was like, no, not Nanny and Grandad Nanny. It was like Nanny Magnets. We call my dad's mum Nanny Magnets, because she has a load of, she collects magnets from different countries that people give them to her. And she keeps them on her fridge, so no, it was Nanny Magnets. And he was like, no, not Nanny Magnets. And it was like, oh, other, and he just said, like, other nanny. And we were kind of like, oh, what nanny is this then? And it was only afterwards that I asked him, does she have glasses like mummy, or is she, like, not wear glasses like daddy? And he said, oh, she wears glasses like mummy. I was like, what colour's her hair? And he said, white. And I said, like, how does she wear her hair? I was like, does she wear it down like mummy, or does she have it up, like, all fancy? And he said, like, she has it up. And that's basically how my nan was, like, famed for her beehive that she used to have. So yeah, so it's kind of like one of those things where we think it's probably her. I mean, he's had it a few times where he's said, like, oh, night night daddy, night night mummy, sort of thing, and he goes, night night nanny. And it's like, oh, and things like, oh, Nanny's standing over there in the corner, and different things like that. But it's always Nanny that he says whenever he makes those sort of creepy comments. So, so I thought that was that's quite cute.
I don't know that one.
But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Like I said, I have a few ideas of what I want to do. I do have a big project in mind that I want to do, but it's having the time to get round to one, doing the studying for it, and two, writing a script for it and different things. So hopefully I can do it. I do want to do like reviews and different things like that on like books and like other spooky things, so I will do that. If you would like me to read ghost stories, then please do let me know, or if you have any other spooky ideas that I could do, please do let me know, because I would love to make it like quite a big part of my channel. So yeah, I am looking for all sorts of ideas and would love to make sure it's what you guys would find interesting as well. But like I said, I really do hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then please leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already. You can also follow me on social media, all the links will be down below. You can also sign up to my Discord where we talk about spoopy stuff as well, which obviously...
Sorry, I don't know that one.
Anyway, before she completely freaks me out, please do subscribe to my channel. You can also, like I said, follow me on social media, all the links will be down below. And on that note, I'd say love you guys, and I shall see you all in the next one. Bye.